Okay.
Good evening, everyone. The Chumash of Vayikra that we are nearing its end. If we had to sum it up in one word, the word would be Kedusha. The emphasis on Kedusha reigned throughout all of the parshas. And the idea of Kedusha, as explained by the Meforshim, is an idea of dedication. And that in every facet of life requires dedication to the ultimate service of the Creator. We say that in what we call Kedusha. So we say Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvachos Melech Haaretz Kvodo. So we say 3 times the word Kadosh. The Meforshim discuss at length what does that refer to. And it's especially an important topic because the Christian world took that and misinterpreted it and accused us of being unfaithful to our own beliefs. In Prague, there is the famous Charles Bridge over the river. And in the 14th century, the Jew was accused of somehow insulting the Christian religion, etc. So aside from the fact that that Jew was put to death, the Jewish community was forced to put an icon on that bridge, which is visible until today, of the crucifix, and around it it says Kodesh, 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 Hashem Tzvachos Melech Haaretz Kvodo. There was a debate of whether in the Czech parliament, whether to remove it or not, but they said it's such an essential part of their history that they won't take it down. So what is Kodesh, Kodesh, Kodesh? So that's reflected in the Chumash Vayikra, in the parshas that we read now. And we read it in this week's parsha, Emor Lakoni, Tzadis Kadishtem, Isem Kedoshim. You should make the Kohen Kadosh over and over. It is emphasized. So the Meforshim say one Kadosh is Kedushas Hazman, time. So Kedushas Hazman is reflected in Judaism, in Shabbat, and in the holidays, in the Yom Tovim. This week's parsha, we have a review of all of the Yom Tovim, the holidays of the year, the special days. Now, there's a difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov, because Shabbat has an automatic Kedusha. No one has to proclaim Shabbat. It says that the Rebbe himself, so to speak, by Kadesh or so, Kivo Shavas Mikol Malachto. So the Kedusha Shabbos, the Gemara says, Omedes. It's constant. It does not require bedding. It doesn't require anything. It's there. And interestingly enough, the philosophers in the Jewish world, like Rabbi Sadia and the Rambam, say that it's there even when the Jewish people, God forbid, don't observe it. It's an automatic presence in the atmosphere and in the universe. So that's the Kedusha Zazman. Whereas the Kedusha of Yom Tov, that's the Kedusha that we have to proclaim and instill. Eile Moadei Hashem Asher Tikru Osom V'Moadom. Bezdin has to say what it is. And we who follow a permanent calendar today, so when the permanent calendar says it's Yontif, then it's Yontif. But if it doesn't say, if we don't say it, it's not an automatic Kedusha the way Shabbos is. And we say that in the Havdalah that we made in Chutz La'aretz for between the first and second day of Yom Tov, in Kedushas Yom Tov, the Kedushas Shabbos, and there's Kedushas Yom Tov, Kedushas Yom Tov, Kedushas Shabbos, Kedushas Yom Tov. If don't go, there's a difference. But there's no question that the idea of Kedushas Azman is a central point in Jewish life and in Jewish behavior and in tradition. And then if you expand the idea generally, it's the idea that time is not here to be treated lightly. And that time is to be exploited. It's the most precious gift that we have. The time cannot be made up. You can't substitute for it. The time is fleeting, and therefore we should try and make the best use of it possible under the circumstances that exist. So that's one Kodesh, the Kedusha Hazman, Kedusha of time. There's a second Kodesh, which is the Kedusha of place, Kedusha Samokom. That was reflected in Eretz Yisrael, which has a special Kedusha. And in Eretz Yisrael itself, Yerushalayim is then reflected in its own special Kedusha. And then in Yerushalayim, we have the Mokom HaMikdash that has its own supreme Kedusha and the Beis HaMikdash itself, etc., etc. But it's an idea of Kedusha Samokom. That place itself has to be sanctified. And for that, we have many halachas to emphasize that to us. All the agricultural halachas regarding Shabbos, regarding the Eretz Yisrael. So in the exile, the halachas weren't there. But there was always a zecher to those halachas. But here in Eretz Yisrael, they're real. So it colors every food that we eat. Trumas and maasros, all sorts of halachas regarding produce, things that are produced in Eretz Yisrael. And in the Parsha Bahar, which is next week, we'll read about the Kedusha of Shemitah, which is a combination of Kedusha Zazman and Kedusha Zamokom. That the Kedusha of Zman of time, so it goes with the number 7. So there's Shabbos, which forms a week, And then there's the 7 weeks of Smira, which take us to Matan Torah, to Shavuos. And then there are 7 years, which take us to a Shemitah. And there are 7 Shemitahs, which take us to a Yovel. So there is always this sequence of Kedusha, of time, but it's also of place, because in our Torah, these are applicable only in the land of Israel. The whole discussion that is rife today, whether or not in the foreseeable future, Shemitah here in Eretz Yisrael will already become a Torah obligation. Because if most of the Jews in the world are living in Eretz Yisrael, Rov Yoshveh Aleha, so then, so to speak, the mitzvah of the Torah kicks in. Until now, our Shemitah is only the Rabbanan. It's a rabbinic decree because of the fact that most of the Jews in the world still do not live in Eretz Yisrael. Now, how you count Jews and how you're going to figure out most, etc., I leave that to wiser people than me. But the fact that it is even under consideration is itself a testimony to the achievement of the Jewish people over the past century, over the past decades. So there's a Kedushas Hamokom, a Kedusha of place. That's the whole shaila, whether you go up on Harabayis, because we're all Tmeim. There's a holiness of place, and the holiness of place restricts things, because the nature of holiness is that it excludes other things. Because I'll say, Kol Mokom Shatamotze Geter Ervo Shamatamotze Kedusha. If you restrict certain things, so then automatically holiness can come. But if without the restrictions, the holiness is not present. Somehow it cannot find a place. So that's Kedushas Hamokum. And finally, in this week's parsha, we read about the Kedusha of people, which is the ultimate Kedusha. And as long as a person is alive, so then that person has an element of Kedusha to it. Because the soul implanted in him by heaven still functions within him, within that body. So the body also acquires a Kedusha thereby, by osmosis, so to speak. But unfortunately, when the soul departs, so then the body is restored to a level of Tumah, which we read in this week's parsha, L'nefesh lo yitama be'amov, because of the fact that the Kedusha that was within the person no longer is present. Therefore, the Tumah reigns there. Now, these are all unseen things. You can't see Tumah, you can't see Kedusha. But we're well aware that many things that are unseen to us are nevertheless present and active in our universe, cannot be discounted. So there's a Kedusha within the human race, within God's creatures. There's a difference between the animal kingdom and the human kingdom. That's one level. Within the human kingdom themselves, there's a difference between Am Yisrael and Umos Ha'olam. Within Am Yisrael itself, there are distinctions. There are Kohanim, there are Levim. Within the Kohanim itself, there's also a distinction, Hagoyin, Hagodol Me'echad. So all of these have different rules that apply to them. Because again, of the fact that the Kedusha engenders a different attitude, a different set of rules, and so to speak, a different mode of behavior. And all of this together comprises God's world And therefore, part of the idea of Kedusha is to say these three, Kodosh, 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 which refers to Kedushas Azman, and Kedushas Amakom, and the Kedusha of human beings, of Klal Yisrael, all of which have separate gradations and separate rules, but are part of the structure of the universe which the Rebbeinu Shalom created for us. And this Chumash of Vayikra, which concentrates on these ideas, introduces us to Tuma and Tahara, to the laws of Kashrus, to all sorts of laws, to the Parsha of Kedoshim to you, to this week's Parsha of Kohanim. All of this is meant to focus us on this idea of the different elements of Kedusha, which form our lives and form the reason, ethos of Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash, Yomer Rotsa Kodesh Baruch Hu, L'Zakos Yisrael, Tzivah Shir B'Laim Torah Mitzvos Shenemer, Adonai Chafetz Aman Tzidkoi, Adonai Torah.